join us on the Ownership Show. We have executive leaders, we have entrepreneurs, we have people with just great stories to tell who've had lots of great success and also some wonderful and entertaining, in many cases, moments of failure. Today, we've got someone who's got all of those characteristics, but also happens to be a very, very dear personal friend to me. He's someone I've known since I was a kid. He was one of my father's best friends, so I've known him a long time, and now I consider him one of my great friends. He's going to talk through some of his experiences, but he also happens to have been there at really key moments of Laker Airways, which is part of my family's history, and also in the early days of Virgin Atlantic. So he's also very interconnected with obviously another wonderful entrepreneur, with Sir Richard Branson. So lots of nights in his life. So maybe bad nights, but this is nights with a K. And for a lot of you that have known me a long time, that my father is obviously part of my history. It's part of my identity. It's not something I always talk about, but today will be something where I do want to get into it. For those who don't know that aspect of my life, my father was a chap called Sir Freddie Laker. He was knighted by the Queen for allowing the common man to travel, and by that was one of the kind of key people that kind of birthed the low-cost aviation industry. He was, I think, probably most famous in the UK, certainly in parts of the US, but I'd say he's famous for two things, both the low-cost aviation industry and also when all the major airlines kind of colluded against him for one of the biggest antitrust cases in aviation history, which you could argue was maybe one of the ultimate oh shit moments. So maybe that's why I appreciate the theme of this show so much. Anyway, today's going to be a really special one. I'm thrilled that all of you are tuning in. I know you're going to love meeting David. And, let's get this kicked off with another great week of Oh Shit. And we're back. So again, welcome for Oh Ship. I want to welcome David Tait, who's joining us from Connecticut. I told him I wasn't going to say where he's from, but I want, if he gets any fans, I want them to be able to find him after this episode. Welcome, David.
Welcome. Great to be here. And, after that introduction, do we have any time left for the show?
Yeah, it's the longest intro I've had, but you just deserved all the hype. Now, I've already had people message me directly about this. In the intro for the show, we listed you as David Tait, OBE. Will you please explain what OBE means?
Well, I got you mentioned in your marathon introduction. I got two previous bosses knighted. Your father became Sir Freddie while I was there, and Richard became Sir Richard. And so they kind of threw me a bone. And OBE is kind of like a poor man's knighthood, It actually stands for Order of the British Empire. It's an officer of the Order of the British Empire. However, my colleagues at Virgin were very quick to point out that it really stands for Other Bastards' Efforts. Take it as you will. But I've got to tell you, one of my all-time greatest name drop stories is around the OBE and your dad. So it actually stands for Order of the British Empire. But I was the Queen pinned this medal on me, and it's not a sword on the shoulder thing like your dad got. And she's kind of old now, so I wouldn't feel too comfortable with that sword thing. But anyway, I decided I was going to talk about your dad because your dad and the Queen were buddies. They both bred race horses and so forth. And so when I brought it up that she knighted a friend of mine, Sir Freddie, a few years earlier, she said, "Oh, how is Sir Freddie?" And I said, "He's very well, Your Majesty. In fact, I'm having dinner with him tonight, a little celebration." And she said, "Oh, well, do send him my regards." So that night at Blake's in London, we had a dinner party, and your dad showed up, and I hugged him. And I said, "Oh, by the way, the Queen sends her regards." I mean, that's a name drop opportunity you don't get in 3 lifetimes,
Yeah, so that's some high. That's a life achievement name drop. I like that. That's wonderful. Well, David, there's so much history, and I want to just again, I do this every episode, but I want to say it again. I remind people that I think there's a lot of shows out there that really celebrate people's most successful moments and all their highs and highlights and things that I think everyone always knows about. What I think is so much fun about Earthship is celebrating these moments of failure, kind of acknowledging these moments when things didn't go quite right, and maybe what people learned from them, or the lessons that they got from them, or just even what the experience is, so that other people maybe who are going through challenges know that even the most successful people have some serious oh shit moments happen to them. And so you've been through some really fascinating stages of your career. I'd actually like to start on some of the Laker Airways side of things. What was that like back then? I mean, you guys were doing some pretty revolutionary things. I mean, just as a high level, I mean, what was kind of being part of one of the first low cost airlines?
Well, as you said in your introduction, Freddie actually called them the forgotten man was who he was catering to. So he was, at the time when we started Laker Skytrain, which was the name of the service, flying DC-10s across the Atlantic, we had to do it around the regulations. With people had to be members of a club, right, to get on board, affinity clubs and so forth. And so we had some wild stuff there. You'd get all these made-up club names like the Left-Handed Grandmother's Club and stuff like this. And we once actually had a bunch of nuns who weren't quite nuns, who almost got arrested at Gatwick on one trip. So we did a lot of kind of borderline stuff to get around the stupid regulations.
And this was basically because you couldn't have scheduled low-cost prices.
That's
so
right.
You had to make up fake chartered flights that operated like scheduled for these groups, basically.
No, it was partly to demonstrate the lunacy of the regulations, which was doing nothing but denying people cheap airfares, and at the same time, which may have been a little bit more the reason for them, protecting the interests of British Airways, which was at that time was owned by the government. It was a crown corporation. So there were very stupid regulations, and we made them look so stupid that in fact Edward Heath knighted your dad for having
for making a fool of
what they tried to shut down for years. Sure. So it was, but essentially, I mean, when we started the thing, you could fly to the cost of flying with us to New York was the same as British Airways was charging to fly to Paris. That was kind of
an hour flight versus a 9-hour flight, basically.
7 hours, whatever. So we did a lot of really great things, but the key to it was that it wasn't just the airfare that was low. We had fun. We had great cabin crews who had fun with the passengers. They weren't sort of. I remember on British Airways once when I ordered red wine with a fish dish, the steward saying, "Are you sure? I thought you were having fish, sir. You really want red wine?" And I thought they're saying, "Screw you! Yes, I'll order what wine I want." We didn't do that kind of thing on Laker. We had the crews were great. They had fun. The passengers had fun. It was a precursor. Virgin very much picked up the flag and ran with it after Laker had gone away. So it was just very different. It was great value and a fun experience.
Yeah. What when you think about some of the things that you used to see in terms of other airlines playing kind of dirty tricks on Laker or anything like that to compete, is there any kind of moments that kind of stand out in your mind as just like, wow, I can't believe they tried to pull that on us?
Well, I was there with your dad in New York when he got the phone call from McDonnell Douglas Finance saying that they were having to withdraw the 50. It doesn't sound like a lot now, but in 1982, $50 million was a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And they had to withdraw that under pressure from British Caledonian, British Airways, Lufthansa. Everybody that flew McDonnell Douglas DC-10s threatened essentially to shut them down or never buy another airplane from them if they went ahead and financed Laker. So it was a very open, unveiled piece of it was illegal essentially. Mm-hmm. And so I was on one of the phones. Your dad had me listen in the hotel in New York when that happened. So I was there at that unbelievable moment. And rather than your dad had spent the day in New York recording a whole new TV ad series that we were just going to break, and instead of that, he found himself in a flight back to Gatwick to gently wrapping the whole thing up. It was kind of tragic. It was ruined. It was killed by its success. At the time in February 1982, we had risen to the 4th largest carrier on the North Atlantic by passengers carried. And that was just too much for the others on the North Atlantic to put up with. And then they started trying to match our fares. So we put a business class in, and that was, in retrospect, maybe that was a mistake, because it really kind of tweaked them a little bit beyond belief. And so it was a great experience. It was a very sad and tragic end. And then the antitrust suit, which was shut down by Thatcher and Reagan, that was quite improper as well. To have the president of the United States ask the Justice Department to shut down an antitrust suit because he wanted Thatcher's support on Star Wars, and it was a.
I just can't imagine a president of the United States in any era getting involved in this kind of stuff.
No, it's totally unimaginable. Thank goodness that could
never happen. Oh wait, never mind.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
So who says history doesn't repeat itself?
Yeah. Unreal. And so how did you go about meeting Richard Branson out of interest?
Well, that was your dad's fault as well.
Yeah.
Richard called him and said, he was planning to start an airline. And this is a guy, a bearded rock and rolly guy from the music industry, saying he wants to start an airline. I'm sure your dad nearly fell out of his chair at the thing.
Richard, people don't forget, but he wasn't known back then. I mean, when he started doing Virgin Atlantic, he had Virgin Records, and that was it, right?
Well, I had a few record stores. They weren't mega stores by that stage, but no, even in the music industry, he wasn't the biggest name. But I mean, he was quietly successful with it. But he got tired. He used to fly the Atlantic all the time with Virgin Records business, British Airways, Pan Am, TWA, who all consistently charged way too much. When Laker was there, when Laker went away, of course, it fell right back to higher fares. But the service was consistently bad. It was consistently overpriced. And after one particularly bad flight, he came back and told his colleagues at Virgin Records, I think we should start an airline. They thought he was joking, but he was serious. And this he's always looked at businesses from the outside in, from the consumer standpoint. And he's never really, if you look at all these companies, he's never really started anything. Maybe the Galactic thing, but generally speaking, he hasn't started something new. He's just taken something that exists that is not that good and made it better.
Yeah.
And so
he was inspired. Being a great operator and a great brand guy. Yeah.
He thought you'd have to try pretty hard to do it any worse than the incumbents were doing at the time. So he called your dad, and in the conversation he said, "By the way, is there anyone in the United States that you could point me to that might help me do this thing?" And your dad gave Richard my name. So I was working in Miami for a consulting company at the time. And so I get this call from Freddie saying that I've been talking to this crazy guy. He thinks he can start an airline. He was giggling. That giggle he had, it was wonderful. And he said, so I gave him your name. And I said,
he's like, tell me how that call goes.
So 10 minutes later, I got the call from Branson, and I guess, as you can say, the rest is history. I flew over to see him on his, and a lot of people now will say, well, starting Virgin must have been really easy, with Branson and with the Virgin brand and all of that. None of it really existed. The Virgin brand was on a label and a record that went around and around, and you don't buy records for the label, you buy it for the artist of the song. And people like Culture Club, Boy George was his big success at that time. And so I flew over and went to see him in Little Venice in London on the houseboat that was his office and his home. Holly's daughter had just been born at the time I went over there. So I was expecting this big Virgin, office or something. Yeah. Instead, the address was opposite number 67, such and such a street. And there was a wall with a gate in it. And that was opposite number 67. And I went to the houseboat. But I was taken with his enthusiasm and his idea that we could really do things differently. And so I went back and told my wife that I was going to do this thing with this guy. I said, it probably won't last a year, but but let's. Anyway, it almost didn't at one stage. I mean, Richard had to sell Virgin Records to fund the airline. But again, I was incredibly lucky that to go from someone such as Freddie to meeting somebody else who genuinely did manage to pick up the flag and run with it, and we did some pretty amazing things.
Yeah, they had a lot of similar energy, and it always made my day. When I was growing up, obviously Branson is someone else I admire, and whenever I'd see kind of any notes about, his books about, my father being one of his inspirations or one of his mentors, I always thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with the second version playing was something called The Spirit of Sir Freddie. I was gonna.
He said he didn't want to be on the first one, so we put the second one. It was 3 years. It was a very controlled growth.
Yeah.
It was 3 years before we got the second airplane.
Yeah.
And we decided the second destination was Miami, and that 747 was named The Spirit of Sir Freddie.
Yeah. I think they just took it out of rotation like 6 or 7 years ago, so it lasted quite a.
I don't know. That one might have. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I lost it. All the 747s are gone now as of just the last one. So
it was the article. They've really pulled them all out at this point. So
it's very sad. It's such a magnificent airplane. Really very sad to see it go, but it's been around for a very long time. So,
and so when you look back, I guess that whether it's Laker Airways or even Virgin, and you think about your own kind of, I think, development as a leader, I think you look at two companies that I think have had ups and downs. Is there any big thing when you think about maybe talking to other execs or out there, that things you wish you knew that you knew, now that you knew then, that you could pass on?
Well, I mean, your dad taught me an awful lot. He had some wonderful sayings that he used to throw at you frequently, like, only a fool never changes his mind, I think is one of the better ones. And then, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions was another one. But I learned from the Laker experience, first of all, that hanging your hat just on price alone, and it wasn't, but the biggest selling point was price. Was maybe left you a little bit too vulnerable to price matching and dirty deeds by the competition. So at Virgin, we worked very hard to do things that had elements that couldn't be copied. So price can be matched. It can be the same airplane with the same number of seats, but the price can be matched. So what we did, we leveraged our smallness by doing things that we knew the competition couldn't do. When we started out, we had one 747 for the first 3 years, and we put, limos were included in the upper class, the business class service. We knew that British Airways couldn't do that on their 16 US routes, let alone the rest of the world. And what about first class? Would they have to give them a Rolls Royce or something? Concorde, oh my God. So that, and then the other thing we did was we always made sure that the people on the delivery end of the process, the ones who were working in the round hole, and literally on an airplane, weren't being delivered a square peg. And the classic sort of, oh my God, why didn't they talk to us about this before they sent us this baggage shed? If they'd only asked us, it would have been different. So you chisel off the edges off of the square peg, and it kind of fits, but it rattles around, and it's not quite right. We always made a point of getting. We had these sort of little. The Quebec, the French Canadians call them 5 cassettes, little 5 to 7 wine and cheesy type things, where we'd have people's opinions. It would ask for people to tell us what they thought we were doing right and what we were doing wrong. And we had the basis of it. There's no such thing as a silly idea. There is, of course, but there are a lot of very good ideas. Like the classic would be the girl who said, this is probably a silly idea. No, just tell us. Well, I work on the ground. I work as a manicurist and masseuse. Wouldn't it be great if we could do that on board the airplane? And so a year later, that one lady was running a team of about 50 onboard masseurs, manicurists for the upper class passengers, and they loved it.
I remember that. That was pretty cool.
So there was nothing, there was no way on earth that the competition could do anything like that on board their fleets. So on
a side note, we had another guest on, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3-4 weeks ago now, and his name is Juan Morales, and he's this kind of really incredible digital creative director. And I'll never forget, this would have been like, I guess like early 2000s, he was doing digital advertising work for Virgin Atlantic. And one of the cool projects that he was involved on that ended up winning a bazillion awards, it was a banner ad, and if you moved your mouse over it, it would like massage the banner. And it was all meant to be promoting that, the massage service within inside Virgin Atlantic, but it's a bizarre connection.
we didn't have budgets. I mean, we had no budgets for advertising at all.
Yeah.
So we had to do things that would go beyond just making the point. I guess that the all-time greatest thing we did was even 30 it was 36 years last week, a couple of weeks ago, that Virgin celebrated the anniversary of its first flight. But at one time, in I think the late, maybe around 1990, we had a Super Bowl ad.
Yeah.
And it cost us next to nothing. Because Virgin had a company called Lightship, so it was like an airship company in the US. So we borrowed one of their airships and we put Fly Virgin on the side of it. And I think Super Bowl that year was in San Diego. So it was a beautiful day. It's always a beautiful day in San Diego. NBC was broadcasting it that year. So Fly Virgin. And underneath it, we put a belly banner that said, NBC cameramen are the best looking. And and so every time they cut away to somebody else's $500,000 ad, they first would go to us for a moment.
That's genius.
We got it all for free.
That's funny.
So we probably overrun it 7 or 8 times. The next year they changed the overflight rules so that nobody else could do this again.
I remember another one that always cracked me up. There's actually in the industry, as you know well, but for those who are watching who don't know, there's a big travel award called the Freddie Awards. Named after Freddie and my father. And I remember there being an amazing ad one year, and it was a Virgin full-page ad, and it said, this year Virgin won a Freddie. And then it ... and down below a little set letter said, no, Freddie, that does not mean you've won a Virgin. So, Virgin always had some great stuff.
My other favorite was British Airways once ran a 2-page spread in the New York Times that said, more people fly British Airways internationally than on any other airline. And if they'd stopped there, okay, so who cares? But they didn't stop there. They then said, duh, D-U-H. And I thought, what the hell's that all about? What's that tone of voice? So I called the agency, and to cut to the chase, the very next day, if you open your New York Times, same section, main news section, on the left-hand page, it repeated, more people fly British Airways. Other airline, duh. And on the right-hand page, it said, more people switch to Virgin Atlantic from British Airways than from any other airline. Ha!
No. Nice.
We ran it once. We blew our hole. It was like $180,000 ad or something. But this got written up all over the country. British Airways threatened to sue the New York Times because they didn't believe anyone could have got that ad in place that quickly. They thought they had to have leaked it to us, which wasn't the case. So we had a lot of fun with it. And it was and just when you put an ad like that out, it gets you talked about. Mm-hmm. It makes people think that, hey, if these guys are as much fun as they appear to be, then they must be fun to fly with as well. So, I mean, at the time, American Airlines was putting out these sort of pictures of Zen, Vermont lakes at dawn. What the hell's that got to do with the flying experience? So anyway, we had a lot of fun, and we made a lot of friends.
I'd love to hear your point of view. I think when you look at whether it's these 2 airlines, these kind of similar airlines you've been involved with, and you look at maybe it's some of the big personalities that are driven there, both in terms of how you could argue my father would kind of use his personality to attract a lot of attention more without spending money, and then the same way in which Richard did that. I'd love to get any kind of reactions you have, first off, to just how those 2 gentlemen did that, and then maybe even hear if you can remember any times where, frankly, they may have had no shit moment and those ideas went wrong.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think Richard did learn a lot from your dad. I mean, your dad was the ultimate show. I mean, your dad was the best salesman I've ever seen. He could sell a glass of water to a drowning man. And I mean, I saw him once in Toronto, where I studied with Laker. In Toronto once, he gave this sob story to a hotel manager about, I can't afford to pay these rates for my cabin crew. I mean, we look at our fares compared to everybody else. And this guy almost ended up paying the cabin crew to stay in his hotel. And a few weeks later, the guy was no longer there. I'm sure he lost his job over the rate that he agreed with Freddie. So he was a charmer. He lit up the room. And you probably haven't mentioned this. He was on the cover of Time and Newsweek. in the same month, as I recall.
I didn't know
So
that.
that's well, unlike certain people who have fake copies of Time covers all over the walls, you should have a genuine one of him somewhere.
Yeah, I've got them. I never noticed the dates, though. I didn't realize they were in the same month.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Richard did a lot of talking with your dad, and obviously I did a lot of talking with Richard as well. And so his getting out there and getting in transatlantic boat rides that sunk and so forth. The first one sank. Richard took a speedboat essentially from New York to London to try and capture the Blue Ribbon, which is the prize for the fastest ocean crossing, previously held by a huge liner, and it sank just short of getting to the UK. So on the front page of the New York Times and other things, we had the Virgin logo on the bow of a sinking speedboat just before it slipped below the waves. Now, you can't buy that kind of, you can't buy pictures on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post and everything. So he got into and he overshot California once and ended up in the Northwest Territories on a frozen lake just ahead of a snowstorm, which made the story even better. He did a lot of silly stuff and took a lot of very serious risks with his life. He'll tell you it was all for publicity. He was enjoying it at the time, obviously, but he learned a lot from your dad as to how you have to get out there and be the face of the airline. And Laker Airways and Branson, it's called Virgin, but Virgin Branson, they're indistinguishable. Freddie used to say it has to be good. I've got my name on the airplane was one of his many lines. So. And similarly, your dad would be there as often as he could. The office was at Gatwick, and the main base was at Gatwick. He'd be forever down shaking hands with people in the check-in area or flying with them on the airplanes in New York. Richard learned to do the same thing from your dad. No one had ever done it quite that way before. British Caledonian, which was the sort of second British Airways, that's Freudian slip, second British airline at the time. Again, had executives who wore suits and sat behind big desks and gave orders, So your dad really changed the way it was done, and that kind of rubbed off on Richard, no question about it. That said, to come back to your question, there's a number of things that Richard insisted he wanted to do with the Virgin brand, which didn't quite work out. So a brand is great, a good brand is terrific, but it's what you put behind it that really is the matter. So is the product. So, I mean, Richard one time decided he wanted to get into the rubber goods business. And he wanted to get into Virgin condoms. And he was going to call it Virgin Condoms. And he came home and told his wife, Joan, who's a Glaswegian, a very broad Scot. He came home and said, Richard, Joan, very exciting, we're going to start a line of condoms called Virgin Condoms. And she looked at him and said, Richard, are you kidding? Virgin Condoms? Are you nuts? And he said, oh, yeah, hadn't thought about that.
Hadn't thought that was true. I think like with a brand.
If anyone recalls at the time, they were renamed Mates, and the M on the Mates was actually two upside down Virgin B's, but. So that was one. And the other one that goes very much hand in hand with it was a bridal wear company called Virgin Bride. Now, that, again, is a little bit of a stretch in terms of branding. And to make it worse, Richard quite famously had a picture taken of himself in a full white bridal gown.
Yeah. Nice, a good solid hairy chest the man's rocking.
Oh yeah, it's a hairy chest and a sort of. I think he might have shaved his beard, but it was just awful. I mean, why do people put models in these kind of things? Because the bride wants to imagine they'll look that good in that dress. When they saw Richard in this thing, they thought, "Oh my God!" So, and then I guess the classic was Virgin Cola, and by the numbers, we worked it out that if we got a sort of a 1% market share of what Pepsi and Coke had, we had a multi-million-dollar company, but it wasn't quite that easy. And brand is one thing when it's a service, but when it's a taste, it's a whole different thing. And then I think we maybe underestimated the shelf space clout that Coke and Pepsi had over major distribution networks. So if we got into a store, we're usually in the bottom shelf around the back corner somewhere rather than up front with the other guys. So it lasted for a while and it was fun. But again, it just goes to show that you cannot. I mean, Virgin's done it more than most in terms of spreading the brand over a huge range of very different services that don't even connect in a lot of cases.
Sure.
But it doesn't work on absolutely everything.
Yeah. And so, I've asked you a lot, but, about some of these kind of fascinating partnerships or folks you've worked with over the years. If you had to summarize yourself or describe yourself in a not through what you do, but just the essence of describing your life, how would you do that out of interest?
I think good question. I'm first of all, I'm very much a glass half full guy.
Yeah.
I never let anything, whatever the case inside might be, I'm very good at covering it up from the outside, that people don't see me go, oh, geez, you've got to be kidding. I'll say, oh, that's a shame, whatever it might be. I'm a consensus builder. I always like the story I told earlier. I think it's important to get everybody's input. If you get people involved in it, then it builds pride of association and so forth, which is very meaningful. So I've always tried to be a good listener with everything except one thing. I'll come back to that in a minute. But I think it doesn't. You never learn anything by listening to yourself speak. Essentially, is what it comes down to. So the one thing I'm not very good at listening to is names. I'm terrible when it comes to it.
Worst. I feel your pain on that. It's almost like if someone can tell me, and it's seconds can go by, and they can finish a sentence and it's gone. But you can tell me other things, random knowledge, and I'll retain it.
I know. I don't. I mean, I have to admit, I really don't even listen because I know I'm not going to remember it. So
for a guy who's wildly optimistic and most things, you're a real defeatist when it comes to names, eh?
But the crazy thing is that when somebody comes, I mean, my wife is incredible at saying, "Oh, I saw Tom today." I say, "Who's Tom?" And she'd say, "Well, we had dinner with them 2 weeks ago." We did, and his wife Nancy and kids Mary, Betsy, Lou, and I'll say, who? So, I just not very good at it. So if I could live my life over and have one skill, I admire people so much who have that skill, and it's very meaningful when someone who you haven't seen for 2 years, and you bump into them in the street and say, "Hey, David, how are you doing?" I don't know how they do that.
This is one of the few things I can say I really appreciate with social media. Thank God for the ability to quickly look up names. Like, oh yeah, I know that guy. I need to see their face. So that's hilarious. And so I was, I couldn't help but think to myself, okay, I hate to ask, but I know a lot of things you are good at. Is there anything you're not good at or you have failed at?
Marriage.
Yeah, I still think Dad's got you beat there. I think he was. It took him four times the charm. So
I was best man at your dad's fourth wedding, right? At your mom.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. No, mom was 3, I believe. So Jackie was 4.
Sorry. I was. Your mom was 3. Yeah. So it was number 4. So I've been married twice. I'm still married. First time around was 18 years, and that was Saskia and Ian. And this time it's been almost 25 years. So I guess I'm getting better by the numbers at least.
Yeah. No. Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I've been disappointed with that I would love to see happen. I was working with Israel Aircraft Industries to build a little small twin-engine jet that didn't quite work out. They changed their mind and it ended up going somewhere else. It became the Phenom 300 with Embraer. So there's a lot of sort of entrepreneurial things that I would have, should have, maybe. And there are some things with Virgin that I tried very hard to push through. But as Virgin grew, after 20, like I think companies are like kids, when you're young and bubbly and just learning, everybody loves you and they give you a lot of leeway, but then you get through the sort of spotty teens and the acne starts taking over, and by the time you get to your late teens, you think you know it all, and so I think that kind of growth in companies. By towards the end of my time at Virgin, there were starting to sort of I don't know how many McKinsey people you have listen to this, but I'll say it anyway. There were a lot of kind of McKinsey types starting to come in there who, you know, what should have been the original Virgin America ended up being JetBlue, and I think Richard even would admit that was a mistake. But the feeling at the time was, if we can't own it, we shouldn't brand it. I pointed out that that because of the foreign ownership regulations, it would take an act of Congress to get that through. So one of the guys in the ex-McKinsey guy said, well, okay, let's get an act of Congress that. I mean, it's just not that easy, you know. So so there's a lot of stuff that I'd like to have seen happen, but I've had a great life. I can't complain about anything, and I'm currently involved with a couple of projects that I'm excited about as well. So, and I've taken to writing. Writing is one of my great loves. So.
One thing I'd love to ask you about is, and just reflecting, and I don't think I've ever said this to you actually on a personal level for me, you know, when you think about reflecting on what you've been successful and what you've been failed at and what your kind of challenges are, one of the big things I learned from my father, and I try and be very conscious of it myself as something that I think could be a failure, is being conscious of ego. And I feel like I looked at some of the things that, you know, in my own life, things that I've made mistakes with, where I think I let my ego, and in this sense, when I say ego, I mean a sense of like worried about what other people's perceptions of me were, or wanting to look and be and perceived a certain way, and done something to try and live up to that standard, even if it wasn't the right smart decision in the short term. And I also feel like I could look back, and I feel like there are decisions even I watched my father make, frankly, even with Laker Inc., the US airline, you know, there was expansion plans that were made there, you know, that weren't necessary. And I think we're largely ego driven. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. If you know, if first off, if that's something, is that in my head, or and have you observed that in other people? Do you think that's an important learning lesson?
Well, we've all made decisions that we would probably take back if we could. I never would put your dad's name and ego in the same sentence. Quite frankly,
that's good. That makes me feel better.
I think a lot of people pushed your dad as a brand to do things because, hey, Freddie, you know, you can do this, and I think that maybe there's some self-interest in some of those things, particularly the one you just mentioned, for instance. So I think ego trip. Ego can be a very dangerous thing.
And I want to be clear. I think there's a difference between ego when people trip out on their overconfidence, and then I think there's another one where you can be pushed into uncomfortable areas because you feel like you need to live up to a reputation or a prior glory or something like that.
Yeah.
And you know, and again, maybe Dad wasn't guilty of it, but I can certainly think of some times where I made those mistakes in my life. You know, and I'm thankful to be self-aware about it now, so it's not a trap I fall into often, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean, looking back on some of the stuff I've done in my life, I will now think, geez, that was pretty fancy stuff, you know. I mean, sort of, you know, chatting to Princess Diana on an inaugural flight and stuff like this was wow. But at the time, it was just part of the job, you know. It wasn't. Yeah. I never saw it as being anything that made me special. What made Laker Airways special? Yes, your dad's charisma. You know, there was a saying, work for Fred and sell your bed. You know, people were so dedicated that they worked very, very hard for the man. And they'd say they worked for Freddie. And the same with Virgin. People will to this day say, oh, I work for Richard. And you'll say, oh, which company? Yeah. And that makes a huge difference in terms of loyalty and as I said earlier, pride of association and so forth. And your dad really perfected that, and if some people saw him as being full of himself, he really wasn't. That's just who he was. He was big. He was large. He was larger than life. Richard, by comparison, is, you know, Freddie was anything but shy. Branson, I've often characterized him when I first met him as kind of being like a shy Bible student. You know, he was very uncomfortable in a group of strangers or whatever, where your dad just fed off of it. You know, so very different people. But I think the two, again, I'm very lucky to have been involved with two of the biggest, most incredible, against the odds brand building exercises in the history of aviation. I think. Yeah. Against all odds, we both of us did it on a wing and a prayer kind of thing, and both of us really had no right to succeed in the face of the kind of competition that we had. But Virgin, was hanging on by his fingernails a little bit of late, and Laker Airways was done to death for political reasons. So the outcomes were kind of different, but we both companies managed to change the world of aviation and make it a better deal for the consumer in the process.
I think that's a perfect place to kind of wrap up this week's episode on, I think, a really powerful statement about both companies. I think about the journey you went on, and frankly, navigating an exceptional amount of oh shit moments. So well done, sir.
I don't get to talk about you and my daughter running naked around the pool.
We can go there if you really want to. Yeah. I actually was terrified that you got to our producer Robert before the show, that all like the family photo reel was going to come out in the middle of this. So
I should clarify that you were both about 3 years old, so I guess that.
There's rules against that now, so
And you had hair then as well.
I did. I had great hair there. You may have inspired my lifelong appreciation for pranks with you and Dad. So I never quite know what was going to come up today. I do know that I really, really enjoyed this catching up with you. You and I get to talk, but getting to share these conversations with other folks, share some of these stories, and then frankly preserve it in video is something that is special to me. I hope everyone that watched it had a great time. I hope you had a great time. And for those who are watching, you won't be there for David's and I's next chat, but I look forward to chatting with you soon, David, hopefully over a drink. But it's this crazy COVID thing.
Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. I'll see you later, mate. Cheers. Take care. Thanks everyone for watching. And if you want to subscribe, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. At the end credits, you'll see links to all of our key social profiles, and you can follow us there. Thank you so much for watching.